Masks are now part of our world. If you listen to Canada's Chief Medical Officer this week, she told us that masks help protect. They protect others around us. If I wear a mask, I protect you. If you wear a mask, you protect me. So I want to talk this morning about masks. Actually, about exclusion. Let me start that again. You maybe couldn't hear me very well because I was muffled. Masks have become part of our world. Canada's Chief Medical Officer has told us that masks protect others. If I wear a mask, I protect you. If you wear a mask, you protect me. Now, a mask can be a symbol of exclusion, worn to hide identity or to protect oneself from the contamination of others. But that changes with the reality of COVID. Because by wearing a mask, we're protecting others. Masks can become a symbol of solidarity with others. By wearing them, we protect one another, especially in those places where we can't guarantee that we'll stay 2 meters from others. Have you, in the past weeks, done the 2-meter two-step in the grocery store or the post office, trying to stay that magical 2 meters distance from other people in there? Well, in a way, masks can separate us from others, but in this time, masks can actually give us a bit of a solidarity with others. This morning, I want to talk about others. A very human tendency is to divide the world into two categories, us and them. Now that can be the division between rich and poor, urban and rural, conservative and liberal, east and west, religious or non-religious. But through the ages, one of the deepest us-them divisions has been the divisions between nations. Wars are always fought against them, and the memories and the emotions of war have left the world into a fractured place with tensions of distrust and racism that are never far below the surface, even in times of negotiated peace. The us-them hostility affects each of us. We see it bubbling to the surface in this time of pandemic. I was bothered by a news article I read this week about a 27-year-old Indigenous girl in Richmond, BC, who was assaulted while she was walking her dog. Her attacker assumed she was Asian, started punching her and telling her to go back to her country. The pandemic has surfaced some pretty ugly racism. Since the first cases of COVID were in China, there's a lot of criticism and blame that's been directed toward the Chinese. In an effort to reduce infection between countries have closed their borders to one another. And that was a needed precaution, but beyond the precaution, this has led to suspicion of those outside our borders. Number of cases and deaths per capita has been lower in Canada, particularly in Western Canada, than many other places in the world. So it's easy to look around at others with some smug comparison. Well, at least we aren't as bad as Italy or Spain or New York. I'm curious as to what the emotional memory of this pandemic is going to do with the relationship between countries. Will it make people more suspicious of others? What's the impact it's going to have on travel between countries? What will our country and our world look like once this pandemic is over? A significant part of faith is how we perceive others and how we treat others. So this morning, I want to look at how Jesus treated others. In Jesus' time, there was a deep suspicion of others, especially between Jews and Gentiles. Racist attitudes were intensified by religious difference. Jews considered Gentiles unclean. They took great pains to make sure they didn't contaminate themselves by contact with Gentiles. This morning, I want to explore two fascinating stories in the Gospels about Gentiles who met Jesus. Before we dive into those, it's good to place those into context. The ministry of Jesus took place in a time when there was strong hostility between Jews and Gentiles. The Jews hated the Romans, who at that time ruled over them and other nations with an iron fist. They went out of their ways to keep separate from others, whether that be the Romans, whether that be the Samaritans, who had some Jewish blood in them, whether that be Greeks or whether that be Syrians. Now, in the time when the Gospels were actually compiled and written, something unprecedented had happened. The church was established. And the church was comprised of people from many different nations and backgrounds. This multicultural gathering was made possible only by the attitude that Jesus had toward others. As we look at the ministry of Jesus in the Gospels, we see that Jesus had a very welcoming perspective toward the nations. We see that reflected right through the Gospels. In the genealogy of Jesus written in Matthew, 4 women are included, and they are non-Jewish women that are in the family tree of the Messiah. In Matthew, Mary and Joseph flee as refugees to Egypt. At the close of Jesus' ministry, Jesus gives the mandate to make disciples of all nations. From our vantage point, in a time when we've been free to travel between countries, we don't realize the degree to which Jesus dissolved the us-them division between nations. So today I want to look at a couple of fascinating stories in which non-Jewish people, outsiders, they came to Jesus at their point of need. There were people whom Jewish people would have excluded, and the attention that Jesus gives them is astounding, surprising. The attitude of Jesus towards outsiders, towards the excluded, sets the tone for the early church. And the church expanded in the following years, expanded to the nations, and continues to expand and continues to challenge our own attitudes towards people we may consider outsiders, towards people who are different from us. So let's look at a couple of accounts in the Gospels. One found in Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 11. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and I tell that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed, and he said to those following him, "Truly, I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." As with many of the events that took place in the life of Jesus, this story is told in more than one gospel. The account in Luke gives some additional details that this outsider was an unusual Roman centurion in that he seemed to have a soft spot in his heart for the Jewish people. Luke adds that this request to heal his servant actually came with recommendations from elders of the Jews who said, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." In Matthew 8, when Jesus asks, "Shall I come and heal him?" this man, who had a role of authority over the Jews, he shows an incredible deference to Jesus. Recognize that this Jewish rabbi would not enter the home of a Gentile. This centurion is actually unusual as well in that he's showing concern for a servant. It was a time in which life was cheap and servants were disposable. But Luke adds the footnote that this servant was highly valued. So this centurion, he has a character that's completely out of line with what a person would expect from a Roman soldier, much less a Roman commander. They were known to rule with an iron fist. Here is a centurion who shows compassion to the Jewish people and to his own servant. Now that in itself is surprising, but the dialogue unfolds, it becomes even more interesting. This man is a man who is used to wielding authority. He could easily have traded on his authority. He could have traded on his favorable reputation with the Jews to convince Jesus to heal his servant. Instead, he recognized the authority of Jesus. He doesn't come to Jesus in a position of strength, but rather in a posture of humility, recognizing his own need. And he simply says, "Jesus, I know you have the authority to heal. I have a need I cannot meet." Remember our theme for this series? Jesus meets us at our point of need, not in our position of strength. He asks for Jesus to accept him and to help him, not on the basis of his accomplishment or his position or his reputation. He recognized that Jesus accepts and helps people who come to him with a need. It's interesting, this centurion is one of the first to recognize and embrace the grace of Jesus. He recognized that he in no way deserves this favor from Jesus, but he asks for his mercy on behalf of his servant who is suffering terribly. When you read through the Gospels, there are many times when people are amazed at Jesus. But this is only one of two times in the Gospels where we read that Jesus was amazed. In Mark chapter 6, we read that Jesus was amazed at the lack of faith on the part of people in his hometown. But both accounts of this Roman centurion tell us that Jesus was amazed at his faith. That's an incredible statement to make about someone who was a non-Jew. The Jews considered themselves the chosen people, and others were outsiders. Others were excluded. And if this compliment about his faith was not enough, Jesus goes on to say, I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus says that the kingdom is open to all. The compassion of Jesus is available to all. The grace of Jesus is available to all. The Jews assumed that they had an exclusive relationship with God, and that relationship with God allowed them to exclude others. They assumed that their identity was their religious performance. That's what made them acceptable before God. And Jesus completely changes the picture. Jesus accepts people on the basis of their need. Not on their accomplishments, not on their position, not on their race. That truth would become foundational in the early church as people obeyed Jesus' commission to make disciples of all nations. And as the church spread from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the earth. I want to look at another story found in both Matthew and Mark. But before I do, just a few comments on how the Gentiles were presented in the Gospels of Luke and John. Luke includes this story of the Roman centurion, but he also gives special attention to Samaritans. He concludes the story of the Good Samaritan. He notes that one of the 10 lepers that returned to give thanks to Jesus, the one who returned, was a Samaritan. The Gospel of John mentions some Greeks that Philip and Andrew bring to Jesus. But even more significant in the Gospel of John, one of the lengthier stories included is in John chapter 4, the woman by the well in Samaria. Now in that story, the disciples are surprised to return to the well and find Jesus talking with a Samaritan woman. None of them have the courage to ask him why. But it's in that story that Jesus says, the Father is looking for those who will worship him in spirit and in truth. I include those asides just to emphasize the degree to which Jesus completely changed the conversation by welcoming and honoring those whom others excluded. Gentiles, Samaritans, Romans. He welcomed those who were not welcomed. He honored those who others looked down upon. It's significant in the Gospels that at the crucifixion, it's a Roman centurion who first recognized that the death of Jesus was like no other and exclaimed, surely this man was the Son of God. So let's continue with another story about a Gentile, found in Matthew 15, 21 through 28, also found in Mark 7, 24 through 30. I'll read from the Matthew account. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came up to him and urged him, Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, it is, Lord, she said. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. So before I go into the question that all of you are asking, I'll make a couple of observations. First, this episode took place in a non-Jewish region, in Tyre and Sidon. If you follow the Gospels, you see that wherever Jesus goes, there's crowds that follow him, and he's trying to get away from them a lot of times. And so on this occasion, he goes to Tyre and Sidon. Maybe he won't be as recognized there. He can get a little bit of respite, a little bit of downtime. But it didn't turn out that way. People recognized him anyway. Second, notice the response of the disciples. They were annoyed at this woman's persistence, and they asked Jesus to send her away. In their thinking, in their us-them thinking, she was one of them. She was outside the sphere of those whom they thought that Jesus should minister to. As we see, Jesus accepts those whom others exclude. Another detail is that Jesus' response to her, it says, "Woman, you have great faith." And that's actually the key to understanding this passage. Notice how much it reminds you of the story of the centurion. He honors both of them because of their great faith. So what about that question? You've wondered a lot of times when you've read through this in the Gospels, haven't you? Why did Jesus call her a dog? Isn't that rude? Well, one possibility is that he said it in a playful tone, or in a tone that maybe echoed some of the disparaging comments thrown back and forth between Jews and Gentiles. And in such a case, he could be saying, "Why are you asking me, since we both know that Jews and Gentiles just don't get along with one another?" He could have said it with a playful sparkle in his eye that let her know that he was on her side. The fact that he was actually talking with her was in and itself a sign of acceptance. Because a Jewish teacher would not be talking with a Gentile woman. But Jesus was no ordinary Jewish teacher. Another dynamic to this is actually the word used for dog. It's a diminutive word, term that could be easily translated a puppy or a lap dog. Not some stray dog, but a pet dog. And in that case, it could have been both meant and understood as a term of endearment rather than as an insult. Should we really be feeding the pets from the children's food? Now, we're at a disadvantage because we have a limited understanding of the language and the culture. But what is clear is that this comment from Jesus, it doesn't dissuade her. She responds very cleverly, using the same image in a way that he has. And it shows her great faith in the compassion and grace of Jesus. You know, you feed the children first, but the puppy under the table is one of the family, and the puppy always gets fed, doesn't he? And Jesus commends her on her faith. She didn't come defending her right to Jesus' attention. She could have said, "Well, it's not fair. I deserve to be healed just as much as any Jewish person." But rather than focusing on herself, on her rights, she focuses on Jesus and his character. "I know you're compassionate. Sure, you will feed the children, but you will also give some scraps to the puppies. Sure, I know that the Jews don't have much use for the Gentiles, but I've heard about your compassion. And I know now the fact that you're even talking with me confirms it. You have more than enough to help all who are in need." She discovered that Jesus meets people at their point of need, not at their position of strength. So what are some implications of these stories? Some implications of the fact that Jesus accepts those whom others exclude. One is the simple fact that you are not excluded. We can all experience the acceptance that Jesus provides. When I was 6 years old, my family moved to the French Catholic town of Beaumont. We were one of 3 English families that moved to Beaumont that year. So we were different. And I was more academic than the athletic, so I endured some bullying. I suspect that many listening here can identify to a time when they felt excluded. It could be years ago, it could be decades ago, it could even be right now. You might feel like you don't fit in with others at work or at school, maybe even at church. The us-them division is one of the tools that Satan uses to divide people. But Jesus has come to bring unity. In Ephesians 2, verse 14 and following, it reads, For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who are far away, and peace to those who are near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. We've all felt excluded at some point. If we want popularity, we're going to be counting on our ability, our accomplishments, our connections. But we're called to come to Jesus, to come on the basis of our need, not the basis of our works. That's one of the reasons the early church grew so quickly. People came to Jesus at their point of need. They received his grace, and those people felt a special affinity with one another. The church is growing more slowly today, especially in the more affluent places, because wealth makes us think that we're self-sufficient, makes us think that we're better than others. But the church is a place where people can find that incredible acceptance. And when the church is operating as it should be, people find that acceptance of Jesus. It's a place where people who feel excluded can find the grace and compassion of Jesus. And that includes each one of us in those times when we felt excluded. Another implication is this: missions is still important. Jesus called us to spread the gospel to the entire world. Now, there are some voices today that say we should abandon missions because missions is imperialistic, it disrespects other cultures. In his book, Making Sense of God, Tim Keller actually challenges that assumption. Let me quote from him. He says, one of the unique things about Christianity is that it is the only truly worldwide religion. Over 90% of Muslims live in a band from Southeast Asia to the Middle East and Northern Africa. Over 95% of Hindus are in India and its immediate environs. Some 88% of all Buddhists are in East Asia. However, about 25% of Christians live in Europe, 25% in Central and South America, 22% in Africa, 15% and growing fast in Asia, and 12% in North America. And then he quotes an African writer who observes that Christianity is less culturally imperialistic than secularism. He's got some interesting comments. Because Jesus includes those whom others exclude. His message is one that resounds in different cultures around the world. And people can find their acceptance in Jesus without abandoning their culture. A third implication is this: all of us, we all have us-them attitudes that we need to overcome. What goes through your mind when you think of them? Now, who do I mean when I say them? Well, those who are different. It may be people from a different country or a different culture, or just people who are different than you because of something in their lifestyle. When you mention them or think about them, what's the next phrase that goes through your mind, or the next words that come out of your mouth? You say they and fill in the blank. That's very telling. In our culture, most people have learned how to be outwardly polite. But what goes through your mind when you say they? Are the next words or thoughts positive or negative? If they're negative, I challenge you to ask Jesus, what's really in your heart? What assumptions are you making about them? Does it make you feel that you're somehow better than them? We can all fall into that trap. Suspicion of others is actually a defense mechanism that we all use. It's easier to make generalizations and to operate on assumptions. It's easier to divide the world into the good guys and the bad guys, us and them. And we assume that they are against us. We assume that they are dishonest. We assume that they are lazy. And if we're not careful of that us, them, black and white categorization, it will grow into some very ugly, very unkind, very racist attitudes in our heart. And those attitudes will be a big blind spot in our lives. If we really got to know that person that we're calling them, we discover that they're far more like us than we imagine. They want the best for themselves and their family. They want to be able to live in peace and security. just like we do. I encourage you to have a conversation with Jesus about the blind spots that you may have towards them. The fourth implication is this. Jesus invites us to share his compassion with those who are excluded. Now, this can take on many different forms. One of the easier ways is to just give money to some of the initiatives that share the gospel of Jesus to people around the globe. And we should all do that. But we should also find ways to reach out to people in our community, in our sphere of influence, to reach out personally. During the pandemic, we're limited how we can personally connect with others. But we can pay attention to the us-them rhetoric that sometimes fills headlines or conversations about this pandemic. Refuse to buy into those conspiracy theories that conveniently blame them, and have the courage to change the conversation when you stumble across those us-them perspectives in conversation. Now, when restrictions are lifted and we once more can engage more freely with others, live with a new sense of curiosity, of connection, and of compassion. Ask yourself, how would Jesus respond to this person who's excluded by others? This person who is different from me? How do I reflect the compassion of Jesus to those who are different from me? As believers, each one of us has received forgiveness from Jesus, not because we deserve it, not because we have earned it. We came to Jesus at our point of need, and he welcomed us. He forgave us, he restored us, he healed us. And Jesus taught, freely you have received, freely give. So let me close this with a benediction taken from Psalm 145. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. All your works praise you, Lord. Your faithful people extol you. They tell of the glory of your kingdom, and they speak of your might, so that all people may know of your mighty acts and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. Amen. Thanks for joining. God bless.